the quiver of information that we provide to the American people about the American fiscal situation. And in days like today, Mr. Speaker, with challenges like we have today, the American people deserve the truth. It's not always easy to say it, but we owe it to them to say it, and these two bills move us in that direction. I'd be happy to yield to my friend.
For his friendship and his compliment, and it's a pleasure to serve with him. I would just ask him on the specifics. Do you favor a tax cut for small businesses that hire people?
I absolutely believe, reclaiming my time, that our small businesses are overtaxed today. As the gentleman knows, I've introduced the most co-sponsored piece of fundamental tax reform legislation in this House, another version of which has been introduced in the Senate, has more co-sponsors than any other fundamental reform bill in the Senate. And what does that bill do? Called the Fair Tax, it's H.R. 25 here, Mr. Speaker, in the House. It abolishes small business taxes entirely. It recognizes the economic truth that businesses don't pay taxes. Consumers pay taxes.
Will the gentleman yield?
I absolutely agree. I don't want to just do a cut, I would say to my friend. Okay. I want to abolish those taxes altogether. And what Congressman Price's Pro-Growth Budgeting Act would do is share with the American people, because we know that's going to lose money in year one because we're cutting taxes. The only way the government gets money is from taxes. You reduce taxes, that's a loss in year one. What that bill would do, Mr. Speaker, is provide the secondary impact, the tertiary impact, share with the American people, well, what happens in year two? It's like going to college, Mr. Speaker. When you go to college, you lose money. It's a drain on your bank account, and if you equate the drain on your bank account of going to college the same as the drain on your bank account of going to McDonald's, you're going to make some bad decisions. Well, you've got to know the impact of those down the road.
Well, the gentleman,
I'd be happy to yield to my friend.
I'm familiar with his fair tax. I respectfully disagree because I think it imposes a national sales tax, which I don't support. But let me ask just two further questions. I thank him for his time. Do you think that we should put up for a vote the idea of cutting taxes for small businesses that hire people? And if so, how would you vote on it?
Reclaiming my time and seeing the ranking member of the Budget Committee sitting there to my friend's right, I look forward, and speaking candidly, the gentleman, if we bring a budget to this floor that doesn't allow us a vote on cutting exactly the kind of taxes you're talking about, not only will I be disappointed, I'll be voting no. We absolutely are going to bring a budget to the floor that is going to cut those taxes, that is going to lower the burden on the American taxpayer so that we can get this economy going again. And again, these are issues that we agree on across the aisle, Mr. Speaker. It's important that we look at the same facts. When we look at the same facts, even as we are today, we can sometimes come to different conclusions. What these two bills do today is just make sure we're looking at the same set of facts, not just us, but all of the American people. I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I have the privilege of having our next speaker be the ranking member of the Budget Committee to discuss these budgetary matters that have been discussed by my friend on the other side. But, Mr. Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to ensure that the House votes on H.R. 3558, Mr. Van Hollen's proposal to make sure that members of Congress do not receive a cost of living adjustment to our pay in 2013. At this time, I'm pleased to yield to Mr. Van Hollen 3 minutes and more if needed.
Gentleman's recognized. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague, Mr. Hastings. Before I say a word about the legislation which members of Congress would have an opportunity to vote on if we defeat the previous question, I just want to say a word about the bills that are the subject of the rule here today. I'd be very happy to yield to Mr. Hoyer.
Mr. Van Hollen, members, in fact, not for political gamesmanship, want to vote to restrain and eliminate their COLA this year. They have an opportunity to do that segregated from any other issue on the previous question. I would urge members, if they want to cap congressional salaries next year at current levels, they vote against the previous question when it is called, and I yield back to my friend.
I thank Mr. Hoyer, and with respect to the two bills that are subject of this rule, we're going to have more time to debate them later. I would just say to my friend from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, that yeah, the American people would love to be able to wish away inflation. I just came from a hearing in the Budget Committee. I'm sure the Chairman of the Federal Reserve will be able to wish away inflation. What the gentleman's proposing is that we put together a budget that unfortunately would get more and more misleading over time, a baseline for our budget, because it would simply wish away inflation. With respect to the other bill, as some of my colleagues, including Mr. Hastings, have pointed out, what it does is create this mirage that somehow by providing tax breaks for the folks at the very top, you're going to get the economy moving, when in fact the most recent Congressional Budget Office analysis shows that at the end of the 10-year period, if you do that, because you add more to the deficit, you actually slow down economic growth. Unfortunately, the way they've got this framed, we wouldn't get that analysis. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's one thing we can do to show families across the country that we get it, that we realize that they're struggling, and that is every member of Congress should set an example by voting for legislation that says in these tough times we are not going to take for ourselves a cost of living increase. And if members vote to defeat the previous question, they'll have an opportunity to vote up or down on it. Now, as Mr. Hoyer said, yesterday there was a piece of legislation on the floor that said we're only going to limit the COLA for members of Congress if we also punish other federal employees who have been serving this country. Employees who have already contributed in the last 2 years $60 billion to reducing the deficit. Folks like the people in the intelligence community who helped track down Osama bin Laden, folks who are helping protect the safety of the food supply. It seems to me we should be willing to stand up ourselves and vote. If I could have another
Gentleman's recognized for a minute.
I thank the gentleman. So I think we should be willing to stand up in front of the American people and just have a clean up or down vote. Just have a clean up or down vote on making the statement that we members of Congress understand how people are struggling. We're not going to take a cost of living increase this year. We haven't taken it for the last couple of years. The country's still struggling. People are still struggling. My friend mentioned American families talking around the kitchen table looking at the budget. Let's show that we understand the reality that many of them are facing. Members of Congress can afford to lead by example, and I hope we will. And it will be an important statement, I think, of where this Congress stands. So, again, I thank Mr. Hastings for his leadership. I know at the appropriate time he's going to call for the previous question. And if you want to vote to make sure that we pass legislation to not provide cost of living increases raised to members of Congress, then you should vote to defeat the previous question, no on the previous question. And if I could have just 15 more seconds.
I yield the gentleman an additional
Gentleman's
15
recognized
The
for
last
15
point I
seconds.
would make is that it's very possible the Senate will not take up the piece of legislation that the House passed yesterday because many of them may not want to punish federal employees. At the same time, this provision that we're offering being a clean up or down vote, the Senate would have to make a judgment as to whether or not to vote up or down on the question of congressional pay. So I hope all our colleagues will vote to defeat the previous question so we can send this important message and make this statement. I thank.
Time has expired. The gentleman from Florida reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Georgia.
I thank the Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume to, again, find areas of agreement with my colleagues. I, too, don't know what will happen with the very fine piece of legislation we sent to the Senate yesterday. If experience is any indicator, it will sit there and do nothing, as have all of the other fine pieces of job creation legislation that we've sent to the Senate done. I take no pleasure in that, but I share the gentleman's frustration with fearing that fate. And I also share the gentleman's belief that we need to show the American people sitting around the dinner table that we get it. But, you know, when Congress sits around the committee table to budget, we say, okay, if rent's $1,000 this year, let's just go ahead and plan to pay $1,100 next year, and then $1,200 the year after that, and $1,300 the year after that. Let's just plan to do it. Let's just guess the money's going to be there. But that's not what the American families get to do. American families get to say, have to say, if rent's $1,000 this year and rent goes to $1,100 next year, I got to find something to cut. I'm not getting a pay raise. I don't see that increase coming through. The economy's not getting better for me. I've got to make those tough choices. Mr. Speaker, if we're going to be honest with folks, and we have to be honest with folks, we've got to tell them there's no spigot of money running on Capitol Hill. If there were, it would be theirs. But there is no spigot of money on Capitol Hill. And more importantly, and it makes me feel so good to be a freshman member in this body, more importantly, while it might have been true for the last 50 years that Congress just assumed every year it would spend more than it did the last, not this Congress, not my colleagues and I working together, Mr. Speaker. What we've said is we know there are not unlimited funds. We know the American people don't have more to contribute. We know that the time for tough choices was before, but it was put off, it was delayed, it was ignored, and the time for tough choices then falls to us. And we've been making them. It's not easy. It's not areas that we always find agreement on, but we battle through it, and we get to the end of the day, spent less in 2011 than we did in 2010 in our appropriations bills, spent less in 2012 than we did in 2011, and I hope that's something that the American people will be proud of. Mr. Speaker, with that, I would say to my friend, I don't have any other speakers. I am prepared to close if my friend is.
I'm prepared to close, and I thank the gentleman for
from
instructing.
Georgia reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I genuinely enjoy working with my good friend from Georgia, Mr. Woodall. He not only brings passion to the job, but an extraordinary intellect. We served together there on the Rules Committee. And I don't mean to make light of the fact of what he just got through saying about us telling the American public that we know that there are no large amounts of funds available because we, and I like the fact that he said we, put things off. But I can't ignore the fact that a large part of that putting things off came about by virtue of us being in Iraq and Afghanistan and spending $1 trillion with borrowed money that we did not have and not going to the American people and asking that we sacrifice to pay for them. $75 billion of it came from passing a Medicare prescription plan that we did not pay for. And there are other measures, and I can cite to Democrats and Republicans. I'm fond of saying what my mother said to me, which was true. She said when she was alive, she said, well, you know, if Clinton is going to blame Bush, and Bush is going to blame Carter, and Carter is going to blame Nixon, why don't y'all just blame George Washington and get it all over with since you keep pointing back to somebody else? But now the rubber has hit the road. But with these two bills, Mr. Speaker, my friends want to, on the other side, drastically reduce essential government programs, and then second, to enshrine tax cuts. And I don't like talking about the rich, as it were. My ultimate plan would call for all of us that are better off to try and do everything we can to help those who are vulnerable in our society and those who are the neediest in our society. But there are those who are in the super category that have not been paying the kind of taxes that many of us pay. You know, you have to put this stuff in real terms. Last year I paid $41,000 in income taxes. People don't believe that. I'll bring my taxes down here and show it to them sometime. Now, I don't have investments. I don't have offshore bank accounts. I don't have any stock in any bond. But the simple fact of the matter is a lot of Americans are in the same category as myself. But they want to give tax cuts to those who are wealthy, who paid less than I did, and less than people making $50,000 did. And to my way of thinking, that's just not fair, and that's all that America is looking for, is a level playing field, not one that gives the wealthiest more and the poor less. If they achieve these changes, they'll succeed in creating a budget process that overwhelmingly favors tax cuts for those that are wealthier, while creating near impossible hurdles for ordinary programs to keep pace with the rate of inflation and thus stay in business while Republicans cry that it's still alive, or millions of other Americans will still be struggling to find jobs, to pay off their student loans, to access affordable health care and decent housing, and to survive in an economy that favors those who have the most rather than those who have the least, favors those who are the greediest rather than those who are the neediest. Dr. Frankenstein was eventually repulsed by Igor the monster that he created. These technical changes to the budget process are equally repulsive, for they add up to a system of government spending that is helpful to those who need it the least and harmful to those who need it the most. Tying our hands in convoluted knots in order to advance a conservative ideology is not the way to run an honest, objective, transparent, and open budget process. I urge my colleagues to vote no against this rule. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert in the text of the previous question or amendment in the record along with the extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no and defeat the previous question. I urge a no vote on the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume to say I'm a few years younger than my friend from Florida. I didn't get the benefit of the Let's Pretend radio program that he had in his day, but I feel like I've had a little dose of Let's Pretend here on the floor today. I feel a kinship with my friend and what that must have been like to hear that, because what we have heard here on the floor is let's pretend that there's not a serious crisis that we have to get our arms around. Let's pretend that we do have the money to spend more and more and more each and every year. Let's pretend that if we give the American taxpayer more information with which to make informed decisions, that will somehow do us harm. Mr. Speaker, these bills are about common sense. These bills are about ending the Washington doublespeak that has been a frustration to folks back home for far, far too long. I've joined here on the floor with Sheriff Rich Nugent from Florida, one of my freshman colleagues here in this body, Mr. Speaker. And as a sheriff, he told us in the Rules Committee yesterday, he had some pretty serious responsibilities. There are no easy parts of being sheriff. It is all gotta happen kind of business. But when he made his budget year after year after year, even though lives were literally hanging in the balance, he didn't get to assume he could spend more next year than he did the year before. He had to justify each and every dollar, and that's important because budget process is convoluted. We're doing our best to make it simpler, but folks might not understand exactly what's at the heart of these issues. And when it comes to this Baseline Reform Act, Mr. Speaker, what it's saying is if the law of the land has a program, let's say we're buying flags to fly over the United States Capitol. If that program is slated to last for 10 years, the CBO will fund it for 10 years. They'll estimate it for 10 years. If it's estimated to last for 5 years, the CBO will estimate it for 5 years. If it's supposed to last for 1 year, they'll do it for 1 year. What they won't do is say that just because the entire Congress is spending $50 million, that next year the Congress will be able to spend $60 million because of inflation. What it says is don't guess. If the Congress wants to speak to how much money should be spent, the Congress should speak. And in fact, we do. Day in and day out, mandatory spending, appropriation spending. But the CBO should not be asked to guess. You want to know what the challenge is, Mr. Speaker? We heard it in the Budget Committee yesterday when the CBO director came to testify. We talk so much about the Bush-Obama tax cuts expiring. If we kept them all, if we kept all of the tax cuts, in fact, if we went back to the tax cuts that expired in 2011 and we brought those back too, reduce the American taxpayer's burden to the tune of every single tax cut that's on the books, America's tax burden would still be higher over the next decade than it has been historically over the last 50 years. If we kept them all, what if you let them go away, Mr. Speaker? If you let all those tax cuts go away, America's tax burden would rise to the highest level in 50 years. The single highest level in 50 years. How much debt would we pay back if we raised the American tax burden that high, Mr. Speaker? Not one penny. Not one penny. How much of our deficit would we get rid of? Would we be able to finally have at least 1 year of a balanced budget? No, we could raise the American tax burden, Mr. Speaker, to the highest level in the last 50 years. And we still wouldn't balance this budget. Mr. Speaker, the challenge is not revenue. The challenge is spending. And these two bills make sure that both on the revenue side and the spending side, the American taxpayer has access to absolutely every bit of information they need to make good decisions. With that, Mr. Speaker, I again ask my colleagues for their strong support of this rule, their strong support for the two underlying pieces of legislation, and with that, I would like to yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question.
Balance of his time and moves that the previous question be ordered on the resolution. Shall the previous question be now put? Those in favor of putting the previous question say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on ordering the previous question will be followed by 5-minute votes on adoption of the resolution, if ordered, and the motion to instruct conferees on H.R. 3630. This is a 15-minute vote.
The House this afternoon has been considering the rule for two bills dealing with the federal budget process. This is the previous question vote, and Democrats are urging their members to vote no so that Alcee Hastings of Florida can offer his amendment to the rule, which would allow for a bill to be considered that members of Congress would not receive a cost of living adjustment in their pay during the entire year of 2013. This first vote is 15 minutes. The rule vote for the two measures will follow this 15-minute vote. Jonathan Nicholson is a budget reporter for Bloomberg BNA, covering the debate today. Why do House Republicans want to overhaul the congressional budget process?
Well, thanks for having me on. The conventional wisdom around Washington these days is that everyone's sort of suffering from, for lack of a better term, budget deal fatigue after last year with the super committee and the debt ceiling talks and so on. So kind of with the idea of major action out of the way or not possible this year given it's the presidential election year, House Republicans are focused on trying to reform and overhaul the budget process, and these two bills are part of that. One of the bill would require a macroeconomic analysis of certain bills with a large budgetary impact, say about $40 billion. The other and possibly more interesting bill would change the way the baseline, the benchmark by which changes in law are measured, to basically scrap the automatic inflation adjustments that the CBO assumes that will happen with discretionary spending, which makes up about a little bit more than 1/3 of total federal spending annually.
What are we hearing from Democrats about these two bills, and do they also agree that the budget process itself needs fixing?
No one in general seems very happy with the budget process these days. The Senate has failed to pass a budget over there for about 3 years now. It's been probably a couple of years since there's been a joint budget between the House and Senate. On the other hand, the Democrats don't like these proposed changes with the caveat of the pro-growth budget bill, the one that deals with the macroeconomic analysis, is they're afraid that using that analysis, which would be supplemental but would not replace the usual CBO scores, they're afraid that that analysis would be used to make the argument that extending tax cuts or other kind of supply-side economic proposals would be made to look less expensive than they actually will be.
A lot of bills have passed here in the House, gone nowhere in the Senate. Does the same fate await these two bills when they make it out of the House today?
Quite possibly. I talked with Kent Conrad, the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, earlier today. He was non-committal on whether he would bring these up. He said he didn't rule it in or he didn't rule it out, but that they're focused now on preparing for a committee markup of a budget resolution, which probably wouldn't happen until March or April, probably.
That's the budget resolution for 2013.
Exactly.
What about are House Republicans working on any other bills that might change the budget process?
Yeah, these two are sort of the first of a package of about 10 bills that have been pushed. They're going to be pushed through the House Budget Committee, kind of at the behest of Paul Ryan. In addition to working on his own budget for FY13, he does want to use this year to try and make some changes and some tweaks to the budget process. The most notable one is actually one with some bipartisan support and bipartisan opposition that would give the president greater power to require Congress to vote up or down on individual spending items that have been sent up to him. So the long name is expedited rescission. The shorter name is legislative line item veto, and that could possibly hit the House in coming weeks and may be an interesting floor vote.
Well, last year neither chamber agreed to a single budget proposal to govern the annual spending bills. What's the forecast this year? You mentioned Kent Conrad and the markup in the Senate side.
Yeah, Conrad has said that he intends to do a markup. He repeated that today in his committee. But basically, on whether that the product of that markup gets to the floor, he said, is beyond his pay grade. The rules for debating a budget resolution are pretty wide open, and that's one of the reasons why Reid, in the past, has kind of has not wanted to take up a budget resolution, because basically it allows for all kinds of various votes on both sides, to try and make political points, or that's what he arguably sees as the political danger from that. Republicans make the point that if you can't budget, how can you govern? And that failing to pass a budget shows how gridlocked the Senate is under Democratic leadership.
Keeping an eye on the budget debate on Capitol Hill, Jonathan Nicholson, who covers budget issues for Bloomberg BNA. Thanks for the update.
Thank you.
And on the House floor at this moment, the first of a couple of votes. This one's the previous question vote ahead of the rule vote for those two budget measures that Jonathan Nicholson talked about. Well, over in the Senate, they have been working for the last several days on the Stock Act, the bill that would prohibit members of Congress and their staff to trade stocks based on information that they learn in Congress. Well, earlier this afternoon, Harry Reid announced that they have agreed, Senate leaders have agreed to consider a number of amendments and begin that amendment debate this afternoon, probably in about a half an hour or so, with a final vote likely on the Stock Act in the Senate later this afternoon. Shortly after that announcement was made on the Senate floor, Harry Reid and other Democratic senators spoke to reporters.
And that we can bring this bill to the floor for a vote today. I want to thank the extraordinary leadership of Leader Reid for putting this bill forward and having us have a chance to negotiate and look at amendments all week long. I want to thank Chairman Lieberman and Ranking Member Collins for their leadership. I also want to thank the leadership of my colleagues here standing with me today who have advocated so strongly for these reforms. Of course, I want to thank my colleagues across the aisle for their good faith and effort in working towards this end. We've tried to focus at the specific task at hand, that closing loopholes to ensure that members of Congress play by the exact same rules as everyone else is something that we needed to accomplish. While there are some amendments today that simply do not meet this test, there are others that will make this bill stronger, and I believe that the final bill will have significant teeth. This sorely needed bill will establish for the first time a clear fiduciary responsibility to the people we serve, removing any doubt that both the SEC and the CFTC are empowered to investigate and prosecute cases involving insider trading of non-public information that we have access to through our jobs. We are entrusted with a profound responsibility to the American people to look out for their best interests, not for our own financial interests. Let's show the people who send us here that we have come together to do the right thing. Today we are taking the first step, showing them that we are worthy of their trust. I encourage all of our colleagues to support this important bill.
Senator Gillibrand, thank you for your leadership on this issue, and it's extraordinary when we start the week off with a vote of 93-2. That's unusual in the United States Senate when it comes to a motion to proceed, an indication of bipartisan support. I'm glad that we're going to bring this matter to close today. After 20 more amendments will be considered, all of which have been announced by the Majority Leader on the floor. All of them may not require a roll call for those who are looking at their watches and calendars. I think what it gets down to is very basic here. Some of us started in public life with people who were public servants and really focused on issues of integrity, and I was lucky to be with two of those people, Paul Douglas and Paul Simon of Illinois, who really believed in disclosure and ethics when it came to public service. One of the most fundamental issues and values when it comes to public service is you cannot look to enrich yourself because of that public service. And that's what this bill addresses specifically, so that the information which we receive, not available to the public, cannot be used in a fashion to enrich ourselves. That is fundamental. It will be stated clearly in this effort by Senator Gillibrand and the votes that we cast today. It's an important step forward in restoring the confidence of the American people in the United States Senate.
Well, thank you, and I too want to congratulate and tip my cap to Senator Gillibrand. She recognized this proposal early on as the right thing to do. She's been persistent in trying to move it forward, and her persistence this week we've all seen. And she saw this through even when it looked like it could get bogged down in a sea of amendments, some relevant, many not relevant. And I think I speak for my colleagues when I say, let's vote already. The President wants this bill. Leader Reid does. Leader McConnell at least says he does. The public certainly does, and 93 senators voted for it on Monday. I think it's hard to think of another bill that was so non-controversial and yet has taken so much effort to pass. Republicans have said we need to extend the bill to the administration. We agree. But then earlier this week we were stopped from quickly voting on an amendment to do that. We had Republicans objecting to allowing votes on other Republican amendments. And then, even more worrisome, you have the House, especially Leader Cantor, being vague about whether he'll take this up when it passes the Senate, even if it covers the administration, which was his original objection. If you didn't know better, you'd think this effort by the Republicans to make never-ending so-called improvements to the bill was really just a clever strategy to kill it. You're seeing that dynamic in the payroll tax cut negotiations as well. In early January, the Republicans said they had learned a lesson in December and were prepared to quickly agree on an extension of the payroll tax. Well, they don't seem to be moving quickly at all. Many of the House Republicans this morning started debating the Boiler Act provision. That has nothing to do with the payroll tax cut and is a way to kill the bill. What the heck is going on here? They don't seem to be moving quickly at all. That's the problem. The Republicans seem like they want to kick the can down the road on the Stock Act. And they also seem to want to run out the clock on the tax cut for the middle class. Haven't they learned the lesson? Their obstruction, which they did more artfully last year, is now becoming clear to the public. Their idea of blocking bills with no fingerprints on them is gone. Everyone sees loud and clear what they're doing. If they actually support these proposals, they should start showing it.
Well, let me add my congratulations to Senator Gillibrand for her persistence and getting this to this point, and to Leader Reid for his working to get us to this point where we're going to be able to pass this bill today. You know, everybody I talk to is surprised that this isn't already law. We all know that members of Congress shouldn't play by their own rules, and so as Senate Democrats, this bill was introduced as a simple, straightforward bill to preserve the trust of the constituents that we were elected to represent. It's the kind of legislation that should have taken about an hour. But we are here today finally to get it done. And I'm glad, because I was beginning to think I was waking up on Groundhog's Day again and again to the same kind of things that Senator Schumer just talked about, amendments that were offered that were not relevant and being debated, and merely as a point of obstruction because of some kind of feeling that if we don't do anything, it benefits somebody. So we are on the right step here. We'll get this bill done, and I really hope that this sets us on the path to begin to get bills passed out of Congress that really reflect the needs of the American people, putting people back to work, creating jobs, and getting this economy back on track again.
Senator Gillibrand, when she practiced law, this was one of her areas of expertise, corporate law, securities. So she was the right person to do this, and I admire what she's done and how it's been accomplished. I also want here to throw a bouquet to Senator Lieberman and to Senator Collins. They've done good work on this piece of legislation. I admire that very much. We're going to have to now we're going to be finished with this sometime this evening. We now need to get back on working on jobs for the American people. That's why Monday we're going to vote on the FAA bill, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. We're going to move thereafter to the highway bill. We're told that that will save 1.8 million jobs and create hundreds of thousands of other jobs. The American people know the only way to solve the unemployment crisis we have in America today is to create jobs. And with all due respect to my friends on the other side of the Capitol, the Republicans in the House, what they're doing is not creating jobs. They are doing pieces of legislation that are hard to comprehend. All these things dealing with the environment, looking at regulations that would certainly make our water less safe, our air less pure, and our food less edible. So I would hope that we can get back now working on a bipartisan basis. As shown here in the Senate, we can get some things done now to help the American people with the economy. We need to do this certainly more rapidly than what we have. We've made some progress, but not nearly enough. We'll take some questions.
Senator Reid?
Yes.
Republicans this morning introduced a bill that would replace the $1.2 trillion sequester, a portion of which, the 2013 portion of the sequester, is paid for by a freeze in the pay of federal workers and a 5% reduction in the workforce through attrition. I wonder what you make of that particular proposal.
I believe that an agreement is an agreement. I believe that a handshake is a handshake. But here we have more than a handshake. We have a law that is now in place in our country that tells how we're going to deal with domestic spending and military spending. They should keep their word. That's what the American people expect them to do, and that's what I expect them to do. So this, what they're doing is a lost leader. It's really unfair that they're doing this.
Senator Reid, are you,
yes.
Can you discuss the status of the payroll tax type talks, and are you concerned about not meeting that February 29th deadline?
Senator Schumer touched on this in his statement to each of you. And he's absolutely right. We hear statements of support. Oh, yes, we want to do the payroll tax. We want to do unemployment. We want to take care of Medicare as it relates to payments to doctors. But I want to see some action, not before you folks. I want to see them in the conference committee. So I'm going to be as patient as I need to be. I hope they can move forward to come up with something that they're saying publicly that they want to happen. But I want everyone to be put on notice that we are not going to walk away from this without having some serious votes. If they're unwilling to do something on a bipartisan basis, then we're going to do something to move the bill forward. We cannot let the economy go into it to be hurt. We have people out there in Nevada and around the country who are desperate for these checks they get from the unemployment benefits. And of course we have seniors who are very, very adverse to losing their doctors. And we have some, also everyone should understand, we have some tax extenders that are extremely important to also maintaining the economy that has been doing quite well. So in short, Hope they get their work done. If not, we'll have some legislation they'll have to vote on.
So the Democrats will have their own bill, maybe reflect their own bill.
I hope it can be a bipartisan bill, but there'll be votes.
Senator, do you hold out any hope for a deal on deficit reduction that could replace this sequester? Is a grand bargain still possible before the end of the year, or is that not possible in an election year?
I have standing next to me someone who devoted months of her life, every waking minute, trying to come up with the grand bargain. But when it came down to having the richest people in America pay a tiny fraction of the second $1 million they make, the answer was always no. So we're available for doing something to reduce the deficit, but the American people say, and we agree with them, if we're going to have some sacrifice around here, let's do it on a fair basis. I repeat, as I say all the time, because it's so true. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and the middle class is being squeezed. So if people want to do something about the deficit on the Republican side, let them go to their rich friends and say, you're going to have to give just a tiny bit.
Senator,
Yes.
actually, for Senator Gillibrand, what amendments are going to go on the Scott bill that you accepted?
There's a list of 20 amendments.
No, which ones are you agreeing with that will go on to the bill?
We have, we're going to have about 20 amendments to vote on, and we're going to start voting at 2 o'clock.
And which ones will pass?
We don't know.
Wait and see. Yeah,
We don't have
we'll wait and see.
Sorry, I don't know.
Some of them were put together fairly quickly. Yes, last question.
Senator Schumer, you said you would agree with an amendment to expand the insider trading regulations to executive branch employees?
Yes, that's going to be part of the manager's amendment, as I understand
That's
it.
one of the amendments we'll take
Right,
care
it
of.
was offered by Republicans, but we accept that. We think that's the right thing to do, and we certainly don't want to have the House make an excuse that they're not going to pass this bill because it doesn't cover both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. We believe it should.
So it would cover all federal employees?
It would cover the executive branch.
Executive branch.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
And just an update on the debate and votes this afternoon in the Senate. They are expected to begin about 2 o'clock. CQ writes about the amendments that are coming up. They write that Senate leaders have agreed to consider 20 amendments, including proposals that would ban earmarks, express Senate support for constitutional amendment to limit lawmakers' terms, extend the bill's disclosure provisions to the executive branch, and require lawmakers and some aides to disclose more financial information about their home mortgages. Again, amendment votes coming up, and final passage later this afternoon of the Congressional Insider Trading Bill, the so-called Stock Act. Here on the House floor, this is the first of 3 votes related to the bill today, a couple of bills today, dealing with the budget process. This is the previous question vote. Democrats are urging their members to vote no so that Alcee Hastings of Florida can offer his amendment to the rule which would allow for Chris Van Hollen's bill to be considered a bill that would provide members of Congress would not receive a cost of living adjustment in 2013. This has been a 15-minute vote. The rule vote for the 2 budget measures is coming up next, and we'll have live coverage, of course, here on C-SPAN.
are 238, the nays are 177. The previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor of the resolution say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, on that I ask for a recorded vote. I ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
This is the rule vote for two measures dealing with the overhaul of the federal budget process. It's a 5-minute vote. The rule would provide for an hour of general debate and consideration of 8 amendments. We spoke to a Capitol Hill reporter a short while ago for some details on the two measures. Jonathan Nicholson is a budget reporter for Bloomberg BNA covering the debate today. Why do House Republicans want to overhaul the congressional budget process?
Well, thanks for having me on. The conventional wisdom around Washington these days is that everyone's sort of suffering from, for lack of a better term, budget deal fatigue after last year with the super committee and the debt ceiling talks and so on. So kind of with the idea of major action out of the way or not possible this year given it's the presidential election year, House Republicans are focused on trying to reform and overhaul the budget process, and these two bills are part of that. One of the bill would require a macroeconomic analysis of certain bills with a large budgetary impact, say about $40 billion. The other, and possibly more interesting bill, would change the way the baseline, the benchmark by which changes in law are measured, to basically scrap the automatic inflation adjustments that the CBO assumes that will happen with discretionary spending, which makes up about a little bit more than 1/3 of total federal spending annually.
What are we hearing from Democrats about these two bills, and do they also agree that the budget process itself needs fixing?
No one in general seems very happy with the budget process these days. The Senate has failed to pass a budget over there for about 3 years now. It's been probably a couple of years since there's been a joint budget between the House and Senate. On the other hand, the Democrats don't like these proposed changes with the caveat of the pro-growth budget bill, the one that deals with the macroeconomic analysis, is they're afraid that using that analysis, which would be supplemental but would not replace the usual CBO scores, they're afraid that that analysis would be used to make the argument that extending tax cuts or other kind of supply-side economic proposals would be made to look less expensive than they actually will be.
A lot of bills have passed here in the House, gone nowhere in the Senate. Does the same fate await these two bills when they make it out of the House today?
Quite possibly. I talked with Kent Conrad, the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, earlier today. He was non-committal on whether he would bring these up. He said he didn't rule it in or he didn't rule it out, but that they're focused now on preparing for a committee markup of a budget resolution, which probably wouldn't happen until March or April, probably.
That's the budget resolution for 2013.
Exactly.
What about are House Republicans working on any other bills that might change the budget process?
Yeah, these two are sort of the first of a package of about 10 bills that have been pushed. They're going to be pushed through the House Budget Committee, kind of at the behest of Paul Ryan. In addition to working on his own budget for FY13, he does want to use this year to try and make some changes and some tweaks to the budget process. The most notable one is actually one with some bipartisan support and bipartisan opposition that would give the President greater power to require Congress to vote up or down on individual spending items that have been sent up to him. So the long name is expedited rescission. The shorter name is legislative line item veto, and that could possibly hit the House in coming weeks and may be an interesting floor vote.
Well, last year neither chamber agreed to a single budget proposal to govern the annual spending bills. What's the forecast this year? You mentioned Kent Conrad and the markup in the Senate side.
Yeah, Conrad has said that he intends to do a markup. He repeated that today in his committee. But basically, on whether that the product of that markup gets to the floor, he said is beyond his pay grade. The rules for debating a budget resolution are pretty wide open, and that's one of the reasons why Reid in the past has kind of has not wanted to take up a budget resolution, because basically it allows for all kinds of various votes on both sides, to try and make political points, or that's what he arguably sees as the political danger from that. Republicans make the point that if you can't budget, how can you govern? And that failing to pass a budget shows how gridlocked the Senate is under Democratic leadership.
Keeping an eye on the budget debate on Capitol Hill, Jonathan Nicholson, who covers budget issues for Bloomberg BNA. Thanks for the update.
Thank you.
And again, a vote on the House floor on the rule for those two bills. The rule would allow for an hour of general debate and consideration of 8 amendments.
Are 238 and the nays are 179. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion to instruct on H.R. 3630, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Motion to instruct conferees on H.R. 3630, offered by Mr. Michaud of Maine.
The question is on the motion. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
This 5-minute vote is the last in a series. Coming up next, an hour of general debate on a couple of bills dealing with overhauling the federal budget process. They'll also consider 8 amendments to those bills. This is a vote on instructing the conferees on the extension of the payroll tax cut and unemployment insurance. They met today, and as a matter of fact, we covered that, and you can watch today's session on our online at cspan.org. David Hawkins of Congressional Quarterly writes that the headline out of today's session looks to be an agreement by Democrats to accept some of the Republican ideas for improving the federal unemployment benefit system and reducing fraud.
184. The nays are 236. The motion is not adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
Mr. Speaker.